Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Things We've Said Today. This is Steve Marinucci, contributor to Billboard and Access.com, welcoming you to another of our shows where we talk about anything and everything and all sorts of Beatles stuff that we can conjure up. Let me first introduce my gang of three, starting from the north, from the cold state of Maine. I know. He's the author of The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop and Got That Something, How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Changed Everything. Alan Cozen. Hello, Alan.
Hey, Steve. Hello, everyone.
Next, coming down the pike, in the probably cold state of Connecticut. Well, it's cold everywhere. The host of the show, Beatles show, Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And finally, down in Pennsylvania, the author of Changing Times, 101 Days That Shaped a Generation, and the executive editor of Beatle Fan, Mr. Al Sussman. Hello, Al.
Hi, Steve. Hello there, everybody.
And we're back again. We took a week off, but we're back here, and we have a subject we're going to talk about. But first, we're going to drop a couple of news items. In the 2 weeks that we were gone, we lost somebody else musically, big music name, and that would be Greg Lake. And of course, there's a Beatle connection with Greg. He played in probably one of the more interesting versions of Ringo's All-Star Band. That was with Ian Hunter and God, who else was in that? I can't remember.
Howard Jones.
Howard Jones. Yeah, I know. You know, that band, that particular lineup sticks out because it was such a different lineup. It was probably the most musically progressive that he has had, and I mean, it's amazing that the people that were in that lineup, and of course Greg was in it, and
Roger Hodgson.
Yep.
And your favorite drummer next to Ringo in the All-Star Bands?
Who is
Sheila E.
Sheila E. That's true. Sheila was awesome. Sheila was.
Oh,
she was a kick. In fact, I really wish he would bring her back. But she was fantastic. You guys want to say anything about Greg Lake?
Who first?
Whoever wants to go first. Alan, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed a little odd for him to be in the All-Stars. I mean, I think it worked out very well, but I mean, he was from more in the sort of progressive end of rock, earlier in his career. I think before LP, he was in King Crimson, the early version of King Crimson, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that was actually a big loss for King Crimson, although they've obviously done quite well since then. But yeah, and that wasn't generally speaking the kind of music that Ringo did, So, but he made it work, on that tour, and he was really an incredible bass player, a very good songwriter, and another All-Star alumnus. So.
And he had a fantastic. I mean, his voice was he was a great vocalist. He had a fantastic voice.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. He really, really did. Ken, you want to say something?
I'm just, it's another tremendous loss this year, and it's kind of ironic that we lost Keith Emerson in the same year that we lost Greg Lake. I mean, how ironic is that? Mm-hmm. And you were just talking about the All-Stars. The beauty of the All-Stars is that you got so many different musicians together on the same stage who musically might be different. And I think that lineup, which was, I believe, in 2001, was the most eclectic group of musicians that Ringo ever assembled. And yet it all worked. And that was the beauty of it all, to go from, I mean, they played in the Court of the Crimson King, which I never in my wildest dreams ever thought I'd ever see Ringo drum behind. That and Sheila E. drumming on the song. And then to go from that into something like The Glamorous Life from Sheila E. And, all of the keyboard work, the great keyboard work that Howard Jones did in the 80s and 90s and doing the hits from that time period, and Roger Hodgson, who's one of my favorite singers in rock. And Greg Lake, I'm glad you said that about his voice because I don't think he gets that much credit. He was a great singer.
Mm-hmm.
He really was. Lucky Man comes to mind. I think that's the song that sticks in my head more than anything from him.
Well, Still You Turn Me On was a great song. And you can't go through Christmas without hearing I Believe in Father Christmas, which
Absolutely.
is a jam.
Yeah. Right.
So, between his work with King Crimson, ELP, his solo work, and he was a great addition for the All-Stars. That lineup alone was amazing. I thought it could be my favorite lineup of all the All-Stars.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I still have to go back to the Levon Helm. And, yeah. I was listening to. I got a copy of the 4 CD complete Last Waltz, which actually I know they're doing a big promotion to that this year, but the complete Last Waltz has been out since 2002 actually, and I picked up a used copy at the local record store, and oh my God, that is just so. Oh, it is just so good. And the sound quality on that is tremendous. Mm-hmm. If you just have the two CD set, hunt down the 4 CD with all the added tracks, and apparently they haven't done anything to it to the CDs themselves for the anniversary this year. What they did add was, I think, an essay, but the 4 CDs are still the same. So, isn't
there like a DVD in the
right? There's a Blu-ray,
the new package, Blu-ray, okay, of the film.
But I think the Blu-ray, if I looked correctly, the Blu-ray was already out. So what they've really done is kind of just repackaged the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in any event, I mean that was a wonderful lineup. A wonderful lineup.
Mm-hmm.
So, Al, do you have something else to say, Al?
Yeah, in the very early days of freeform progressive rock radio, when King Crimson's first album came out in 1969, obviously the title song was the one that got the most airplay, but there was also this one track called "I Talk to the Wind," which is by Greg Lake and has a wonderful vocal, and it's of the same quality as his work with ELP.
Okay. Well, cool. Thank you, Al. Mm-hmm. And the other news item of the week is, for those of you in the New York area, the 15th, 16th, and 17th, there is a tribute concert to Sir George Martin at St. John the Baptist Cathedral in, I believe it's Manhattan, mm-hmm. and it's with Gary Brooker and it's actually the Paul Winter Concert's Winter Solstice concert, and Gary Brooker is the special guest of the evening, and that should be just absolutely amazing. It's a tribute, like I said, to George Martin, and it should be absolutely beautiful. Both men, in case you're not aware, had albums produced by George Martin. So Gary's was his first solo album, and Paul Winter's was called Icarus. And it should be an amazing, amazing evening. I really wish I talked to Gary Brooker last week. I'm sorry, I told him, and I wish I was on the East Coast, because I would definitely go to that show. It sounds like a great show. But the good news is that Procol Harum will be touring and recording next year for their 50th anniversary, which is a big deal. So that should be really cool too. So
is this going to be the full group?
Well, it's the full group as it currently stands. Okay. It's not going to be.
Because I think everybody's still alive, right?
It's the same group he said from about 1992.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's that group. So yeah, it's the group that's toured before. So anyway, today we're going to talk about. Well, we're going to debate the question if the Beatles were musical innovators after Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. and there are some contradictory sides on among us, contradictory views. So I'm going to start with I think I'll start with Al.
Yeah, I got to thinking about that because Ken happened to mention a couple of weeks ago that so many people now consider Revolver to be the Beatles' greatest album. And it's certainly it may very well be their most innovative album, and if not, Sgt. Pepper is certainly in the running there. But I got to thinking that after Sgt. Pepper, and this is something also that came up in the 8 Days a Week film. Went through the end of the touring and then through a little bit on the sessions for Sgt. Pepper, and then it was like in 30 seconds, and they made 5 more albums, and the next thing you know, they're on the rooftop. So it's I got to thinking that after Sgt. Pepper, in the nearly 3 years between the release of Sgt. Pepper and the, at least the more or less official breakup of the group, that the kind of the innovators in the, in what was becoming known as the new rock, the real innovators at that point were Jimi Hendrix and The Who and early Pink Floyd and Cream
and King Crimson.
Yeah.
There we go.
Exactly, and Led Zeppelin. But were the Beatles, the question is, were the Beatles still innovators during those last 3 years or so of their career as a group? And it's there are points to be made positively or negatively, and I think Alan's got an alternative opinion.
But you haven't said what yours was yet.
Yeah, you haven't said yours yet.
Yeah.
What's yours? You don't think?
Well, I go back and forth actually. Certainly they, in terms of instrumentation and stylistically, there's not that much on those last really 4 albums. They did the equivalent of 4 albums between Sgt. Pepper and Let It Be. That's instrumentally innovative, you might say. I'll give you an example. In 1967, on their and this is these are 2 examples that Steve's going to like. In 1967, on their Headquarters album, the Monkees made some of the, specifically Michael Nesmith, made some of the first use of pedal steel guitar on a rock record. And then on their next album, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited, they made one of certainly, if not the first use, certainly one of the first uses of the Moog synthesizer on a rock album, and it just kind of seems that during those last 3 years, the Beatles weren't that musically adventurous, if you want to say. Certainly not. I'm certainly not knocking any of the recordings they made during that period, but I'm just thinking that maybe those albums, the White Album, Magical Mystery Tour, Abbey Road, Let It Be, Half of Yellow Submarine, weren't as instrumentally innovative as, say, Revolver and Sgt. Pepper had been.
I think you can. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think you can argue that. Depends on how you want to argue creative and innovative.
Yeah. How do you quantify innovative?
My feeling is, Hey Jude was innovative because it broke the mold on the 3-minute single.
Although earlier that same summer, Richard Harris had a number 2 single in America with MacArthur Park, which was also over 7 minutes.
That's right.
Okay. And Alan will like this one. Revolution Number 9 was innovative.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I know we've mentioned What a Shame, Mary Jane. Which
first of all, that never came out commercially at the time.
Right. No, but
but they did it.
I mean, they did it. Yeah, they did it, and so I think that and we've heard it since, and I think that was definitely innovative. I think Yellow Submarine, both the song and the movie were innovative. Although we're not really talking about outside the music. I think Abbey Road was innovative because the suite on the other side was on the back side was something that not too many people had done, and outside of straight music, I think you could say Apple Records was musically innovative because of the diversity of musical groups that was on that label. So, it depends on how you want to define it. As far as I'm concerned, I think you definitely could make, and I had a whole bunch of things written down, but basically I'm going to just cut it down to that and say, that really, I mean, as far as innovative goes, according to you can have different degrees, but I think they were definitely innovative. So, Alan, go ahead.
What's innovative about What's the New Mary Jane?
The lyrically. Very lyrical.
I mean,
and musically too. I mean, it's you didn't get a pop group, basically a pop group, which is in the business of making hits, going into the studio and doing that kind of free-form freak out, which John was doing more and more of, and some were getting on the records and that one didn't. But
and I didn't mention I didn't mention You Know My Name, which did get on a record. So,
and they worked on that for like 2 or 3 years.
Well, some people don't necessarily appreciate the real avant-garde stuff, like Revolution Number 9 or What's the New Mary Jane, much to the same degree that they didn't appreciate a lot of what John and Yoko were doing on their albums together.
Yeah, but you could talk about whether people appreciate it, but if the subject is whether it's innovative, here they are completely breaking the mold of what is expected of a pop group, and that is innovation.
Oh, I agree.
Right.
I'm not denying that they were innovative doing that. I don't necessarily look at What's the New Mary Jane as being so innovative lyrically. Like you said, Steve, I don't know what's so incredible about the lyrics of that song. But I do believe a lot of what you said there, Steve, to be true. You have to take a look at the whole picture and look at like Apple Records, like we had discussed. All the variety of the music and the art that was put on there. And they took a lot of chances with the artists that they put on the Apple label. But by the same token, innovative is really, it's a matter of opinion of what you consider to be innovative. In many ways, I think when you're musically eclectic, which the Beatles were from the very beginning, that's being innovative. And I don't think there's ever been a body of work more eclectic than the White Album.
Absolutely.
Much as
I was just about to ask about that.
As much as you look at Revolver, oh my God, it's eclectic all over the place. But the White Album, you've got the most extremes you've ever had on a record, going from Helter Skelter to Honey Pie, and then doing something avant-garde like Revolution Number 9. Then you got country and western on there like Don't Pass Me By or Rocky Raccoon. Something bluesy like Your Blues. Quasi-classical like Piggies. There's so much variety all over the place. They stretch the limits, I think, on the White Album. I think that's being innovative to itself.
And then Good Night. Then going from Revolution Number 9 right into Good Night.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
And not only that, how about just doing a complete reversal of going from Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour to just the bare basics of being a band, for the most part. They had other musicians on the White Album, but, most of the White Album was just them. To do that and strip it and to have more of a raw sound, to go in a completely different direction, wasn't that taking a chance instead of just continuing along the same lines of what they've been doing with, say, Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour?
Alan, you haven't said anything. Why don't you go ahead and say something?
Yeah, I think, while on one hand it's a great debate topic, part of me also feels that it's sort of a silly debate topic because from my point of view, it's axiomatic that the Beatles were the greatest creative group of, basically all time, and therefore innovation is an important part of that. So yes, of course they continue to be innovative. But to pick up, what you guys were saying about the White Album, I want to sort of drag this into a sort of classical thing. I can't say for sure whether the Beatles had anything like this in mind, but back in like Baroque Renaissance times, composers would do this kind of piece that they called a summa, which was basically a summation of everything they knew about a particular topic. So Bach's Art of Fugue wasn't written really to be performed. It was a summa. It was a piece of music written to show everything you could do with a fugue. The B minor mass was a summa, everything that you can do to set a mass. And I kind of think that the White Album is a summa of pop music styles. I mean, in the 30 tracks, there is basically every single kind of popular music you can imagine. You talked about some of them, the country western, and Good Night was a kind of, that song could have come out in the late 40s or 50s or even earlier in a way. It could have been like one of those great American songbook kind of songs. You begin the record with basically the Beach Boys, and then there is folk rock, and there is While My Guitar Gently Weeps is getting into the area of rock where solos are important and that kind of thing. And basically, if you look at it track by track, every track represents some aspect of where popular music has gone. And not just popular music, because Revolution Number 9 was a piece of musique concrète, which was a basically classical thing where you would take different streams of sound and make something out of them, make a piece out of them. And a lot of people hate it. I think it's brilliant. But and as I think Steve pointed out, the juxtaposition of that and Good Night is also an incredible touch. But, the idea of creating a collection that would range that widely is in itself, you could say, well, okay, maybe it's not innovative because they're taking existing forms and looking at them. But they were basically also saying, hey, we are a pop quartet who formerly gave you I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You, and we can do basically anything we want in pop and a little beyond pop too. And we can do it basically better than everybody else.
And could you basically also say that just the mere concept of a 2-record set with a plain white cover, and 30 songs within, could that be labeled as being innovative?
You could say that. I mean, it's, I think you needed the 30 songs to accomplish that overview of pop. And it was, more than people were used to getting. I mean, double albums, triple albums, even quadruple albums are pretty plentiful these days, but not so much in 1968. Not to mention a blank cover. I mean,
right? Yeah, I was just gonna mention that. Yeah, I mean that was a beautiful work of art. A beautiful art move that you could probably that something like Yoko would have done. I mean it's that kind of art.
Right. Yeah. Right. And there is a guy, his last name is Chang. I can't remember what his first name was actually. He actually he's a very young guy. I mean, he is way too young to have grown up with the White Album, but his parents did. And he heard it as a kid, and he now has an artwork that is called We Buy White Albums. And basically what he does is he sets up in a shop someplace. I saw it in New York. It's been all over the country. He's continually buying White Albums and noting down the number that's stamped on the album. I think he only really wants original editions. And you walk into this shop and it looks like a record store, except all they have are bins and bins and bins of white albums, and they're on the wall. And some of them are in great shape. Some of them people have drawn on. Some of them have coffee stains on them. And another thing that he did as part of this art piece was he multi-tracked them. he every time he would get a white album, he would record it, starting at the same time. But with turntables being a little bit imprecise, they begin going out of phase. And so what you end up with by the end of each side is really kind of a mess. And, and in a certain way that edges onto another thing that was going on at the time the White Album was made, which was the beginning of minimalism in classical music, where Steve Reich, for instance, was taking tapes and syncing them up and having them go out of phase. And then another corner of minimalism was doing repetition of short phrases and then maybe adding a bar and another bar. But people heard it as just repetitive. And so when you look at Hey Jude, it's not just that it's a 7-minute single. It's that, like, the last 4 minutes of it are just repetition. It's just the same thing over and over with a build-up, and that's exactly what the minimalists were doing, or some of the minimalists. And John did that again on I Want You, She's So Heavy, that guitar figure that keeps repeating, and then the synthesizer noise gets overlaid, but it's repeated and repeated and repeated. And that is also, minimalism when hardly anybody in the rock world was thinking about minimalism, or at least in the commercial corner of the rock world. And you have yet another, one or more of you have mentioned already the suite on side 2 of Abbey Road, which was definitely innovative musically. We can take or leave John's comment about it being basically cheating by taking bunches of unfinished songs and stringing them together. The fact is, it works as a suite. It unfolds beautifully and then goes into that sort of big jam at the end where they're each getting a moment in the spotlight and trading solos back and forth, which is something else they didn't tend to do in their heyday. But there's another interesting little musical weirdness there. The basic end chord progression going back to, say, Baroque times was, what they call a 5-1. So it's like from, if you're in the key of C, it would be like from G to C. It's just a standard. I Want You, She's So Heavy cuts off on what would be the equivalent of 5. It's unresolved. You expect it to have a final chord at least after it, but it ends right in the middle and right where it would move from 5 to 1. Here Comes the Sun is in the same key. And so it opens with basically what would be the 1 chord. So you turn the album over and you've got this unresolved 5, and then it becomes the resolution as Here Comes the Sun begins. Exactly the same thing happens with Her Majesty. Her Majesty, as you know, is missing the final chord.
Yeah.
And that final chord would be the resolution from 5 to 1. You turn the album over again, and Come Together's very first chord is in the key that would be the 1 chord that resolves Her Majesty. So you have this weird little cyclical chain of Abbey Road. You keep turning it over and it keeps resolving itself. Now, it's almost certain that the Beatles had no idea that was happening.
Oh, I bet they did.
Yeah.
But
that's just a little too weird. But yeah,
but it works. It works. That's the thing. Weird or not, it just happens to work out. So yeah, I think, in those last years of the Beatles, there's tons of innovation. I personally don't see an awful lot of innovation on Let It Be. That's the one album where I would have to, but let's say they were taking a time out to, fight with each other. And Let It Be is, they were trying to do something, and what they were trying to do, they had some difficulty accomplishing because there were too many disagreements about whether to do what they were supposed to be doing. But the other albums, Abbey Road and the White Album, those I think are brilliantly innovative albums. They don't get the attention that Pepper and Revolver do, because Revolver was such a leap out of, from Rubber Soul, and Pepper has the whole atmosphere of the cover and the times and, the 67 Summer of Love and all that. And the White Album and Abbey Road don't have quite those extra things, but the music is as innovative as can be.
Mm-hmm. There is one other thing from that period that we haven't really touched on that could be construed as being innovative, and I know there are two very varying opinions among us about this, and that would be the film of Magical Mystery Tour.
Uh-huh.
One could say that would be innovative because of the fact that no mainstream rock group to that point in time had done, basically an in-house, had, totally on their own done a long form music film.
I'd have to think about that. It seems to me that somebody else did, but.
And also the fact that it was freeform.
Yes.
And even though we brought this up before, because I always relate the Beatles and the Goons and Monty Python, all together, because they were all influenced by the Goons anyway. But I can see so much from Magical Mystery Tour in Monty Python, what they did later on, in particular in their TV show. They borrowed from that, as well as the Goons. But it's all one family. That's just the way that I look at it. But but Magical Mystery Tour to me, I think, was innovative for its time.
One thing that we didn't, or a couple of things we didn't bring up, I don't think anybody mentioned "Get Back," the song, which is one of probably the better down to earth rock and roll songs the Beatles did.
Right, but it's not really innovative though. Because at that point there were, that was right in the middle of that whole kind of back to basics movement, and
I think they were at the front of that. I mean,
well, not really, because it started with John Wesley Harding, Dylan's album, in early '68, and then you had Lady Madonna, and then you had the Stones doing Jumpin' Jack Flash, and then you had the White Album and the Stones' Beggar's Banquet. So Get Back was pretty far down the road.
I just think, I just think the song itself is, innovative on its own. And I mean, it sounded so good. And of course, seeing them do it on the rooftop was great. The other thing we didn't mention was Because, which harmonically, the harmonics on that, especially if you see it in the Love show without the, or you hear the Love album with the instrumentation stripped off. That's really beautiful. And also Something, George Harrison's song, which by the way today happens to be Frank Sinatra's birthday, and Sinatra, it was a song that Sinatra did. So.
And called the greatest love song of the century, was it? Something like that?
I think he said it was his favorite Lennon-McCartney's.
And his favorite Lennon-McCartney song, right.
Yes, that he did. He did call it a Lennon-McCartney song. But, no
one's debating whether or not they put out great music. No one will debate that something is one of the greatest love songs. Same thing with Because. And when I think of the song Because, I think of, it's one of the greatest examples of three-part harmony from the Beatles.
Yes, absolutely.
Along with, This Boy and Yes It Is and those songs. No one's debating that. They still continue to put out great music. The whole issue really comes down to innovation and what you perceive as innovation. I would like to just bounce off one thing that Alan said, because he brought up that with Hey Jude, the refrain being repeated for the last 3 minutes. I kind of felt that Donovan copied that idea.
Oh, sure.
When he did Atlantis.
Sure.
Because the last few minutes are just the chorus of the song repeated over and over again. But I think, and maybe I'll ask the three of you this question because I'm not that sure, but when the Beatles they did something which I always associate with Broadway music and show tunes and everything. But for example, on Sgt. Pepper, when they brought back Sgt. Pepper the song in the reprise, that kind of harkens back to things that you do in musicals. You bring back an earlier song that was heard, and likewise, they did the same thing on Abbey Road when they did the Golden Slumbers Carry the Way at the End medley, and then they brought back You Never Give Me Your Money in that song. Is that something that was new for rock bands at that time?
That's an interesting thought. I'm not
well,
sure.
Well, the Stones did it with Sing This All Together on
that's true.
On Satanic Majesty, but that was after Pepper. But I mean, they had seen musicals, you know. Yeah, it could be. It could be. I mean, they were familiar with musicals and what went into them and how they worked, and I could see them bringing that into, since they were, after all, with Pepper and Revolver, I think they were thinking in terms of albums as, you know, even before that. In fact, well, we're talking about the post-Pepper period, but I mean, all through, once they began thinking of their albums as albums rather than just bunches of hits thrown onto a big disc, that in itself was innovative. You know, and I don't think a single one of their albums was put out without any thought about what goes well next to what else, and what should be the first, second, third song, what should be the fourth, why. You know, I don't think it was done haphazardly for anything they did, you know, going back to Please Please Me.
Sure, that's one of the arguments that people make about the the American albums. That they were bastardized because the Beatles had gone to great lengths to sequence their British albums the way they wanted, and so to have them then broken up into and made into things like Yesterday and Today or the Beatles' second album or something new was, in effect, bastardizing their efforts.
I hope Bruce Spizer's not listening.
Yes, right.
Bastardized. Okay. That's a pretty harsh word there.
Yes, it is. It is.
And there was one other thing I wanted to bring up about the White Album, which I found to be very unique. And it wasn't the first time the Beatles did this, but, there are people who nowadays look at the White Album as though it was a lot of solo work. And, there's a lot of tracks on the White Album that either had just one Beatle on them, like Julia, like Blackbird.
Like Why Don't We Do It in the Rain?
Right.
No, that's Ringo's drumming on it.
Is it?
Yeah. But Mother Nature's Son. But even before that, you can point to Yesterday and Within You Without You was only George Harrison, the Beatle on that. But it was more pronounced on the White Album. There's a lot of songs that don't have all four of them on, and yet it's still the Beatles.
Right.
Is that innovative in your minds? Were there other bands who were doing that where one member would go off and just record, one song by himself and it's still the band?
The Monkees. I think you could make an argument there for the Monkees because I think, and I can't think of the songs off the top of my head, but I believe there were a few songs like that. Well, I mean, even the Beach Boys too,
Caroline, no.
Right. I was thinking of about that period, but yeah, I mean that.
Except that's a whole different thing because, the whole scenario of Brian Wilson basically putting Pet Sounds together while the group was on tour, that's a whole different ball game.
Why? Because it was labeled the Beach Boys.
Oh well, yeah, but it's not the same as what Ken is saying about there being individual tracks on which there was only one Beatle. Obviously in a case like Pet Sounds, you're going to have a song like Caroline No where it is just Brian, but most of the rest of the album, eventually the group did contribute. They did contribute their vocals, but that's a whole different thing, because basically, Brian Wilson had in effect created the album before the group ever got into the studio to lay down their vocals. So that's a whole different thing than just having individual songs where there's only one Beatle.
I think you can probably make the argument, and again, I'm without looking this up, I'm just kind of working off memory. The Monkees in their later albums basically did that, because they worked with the Wrecking Crew, and especially after later on, as the numbers dwindled down, a lot of those albums became that kind of a solo project for those guys, especially Nesmith.
Except that after the Birds, the Bees, and the Monkees, most people didn't really care, because their popularity had nosedived by that time, or at least after Head.
But you're still talking about a situation where individual members created music and it was called by the group name. So I mean, it's the same.
It's kind of a different scenario to me, only because with the Beatles, most of their recordings, yes, they had some songs that had studio musicians, but most of their recordings were them playing almost everything. Whereas with the Monkees, yes, you had Headquarters, and later on you had Just Us, but most of their albums, you had studio musicians backing. Mm-hmm. So I don't look at it the same way as I would the Beatles. So, and also, you take songs like Julia and Blackbird, those are songs that didn't require a full band anyway. But I'm just saying that it's still the Beatles. And to call it the Beatles, even though you didn't have all four of them on the same song, even though they'd done that prior to the White Album, I still think that's a little bit, it's breaking the boundaries. You don't have to think it's just the four of them on every single song.
What about what about, for example? I mean, I'm thinking about all the groups that the Wrecking Crew worked with. Paul Revere and the Raiders is another example. You have a lot of their songs didn't have the full group either. I don't know if we're splitting.
I think you and Ken are talking about two different things, basically.
Yeah.
Because I think Ken is talking about just the occasional side man that might be on or maybe a little bit of strings or something that might be on the odd track, but not a situation where an entire album is basically being done by studio musicians, and then the featured group adds their vocals.
Right.
I'm not seeing a whole difference because different groups did different, had different situations. Alan, help me out.
I don't see this question as one of innovation at all. I see it as one of personnel, and when I think of innovation, I'm thinking of what happens in the music, no matter who's playing it, what it is. So I don't, to me, it's really a different sort of discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in that vein, Ken, did that kind of innovation that we were speaking of, did that continue into the solo years at all?
In different ways, in different times.
Like?
Plastic Ono Band, stretching all the different styles of music that Paul continued to explore. Doing all the more spiritual stuff that George did, going deeper into it than he could have done with the Beatles. Those are examples right there. Mm-hmm. But then, there's always the argument to be made, and innovation is great. There's no doubt about it. It's a fascinating thing to explore. But I happen to enjoy a lot of music that might not be innovative. That's just good on its own terms. There's a lot of great albums that have been made that people may not point out to as being innovative, but they're just great songs. And that alone is good enough for me. I mean, you just said Let It Be is not an innovative album. I love the album still on its own terms. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of solo music where just song for song, they're really strong songs. The arrangements are good. The songs are good melodically, lyrically, and it doesn't have to be so innovative and great and groundbreaking, and it can still stand up on its own terms for me.
Okay. All right. Anyway, we got a couple more things to take up. One is we're actually going to take up some mail this week, and one of them was about the George Harrison show. And David Grazina, I hope I pronounced that right, David. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. I'll just read part of this. He said, one of you mentioned Paul plays the solo on You're Going to Lose That Girl. All right, which one of us was guilty on that?
I think that was me.
Was that you?
Yeah.
He said, Harrison plays this on what sounds like his Strat, despite the interviews to the contrary of the Strat showing up during Rubber Soul. They had them on the help sessions. The open A string on Ticket to Ride is one of their Strats. You want to counter that one, Alan?
Well, I'd have to pull down the Lewison book off the shelf, but I believe it was Paul.
No, I think the listener that wrote in is correct.
He's correct? Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
Paul did play the lead on Another Girl.
Oh, you know what? That's what I'm thinking of. Duh. Okay.
Okay.
So what do we do about that?
Well, we just did it. We just did it. I mean, we just said
we did a mea culpa.
We just do a mea culpa.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, it was a song with "girl" in the title.
Right. There we go. And then we have another letter from Gordon Hartley, who said, "Hi again. Though A Hard Day's Night is my fave album, they were never more together as a unit. I love Sgt. Pepper. I think in terms of the first world music record ever, so much variation." That's an interesting comment. He said, "I recently burnt Pepper with Penny Lane after Kite and have Strawberry Fields after When I'm 64. Track listening runs great with a bit of extra audience noise here and there. I even had Northern songs included after Getting Better. Not a masterpiece, but weird, and certainly adds to the 60s psychedelic sound. But found it didn't quite fit in." I'm not sure. That's Gordon Hartley from New Zealand. I'm not sure exactly what, if I read that correctly, but I think what he said was he put them. He made his own little creation, and that's an interesting idea.
I'm sure he's not the only one to do that too.
I'm sure he's not either. But
all you got to do is group together the singles that came out at the same time as the album.
Sure. Right.
There are singles the end of each calendar year, like you could put I Feel Fine and She's a Woman on Beatles for Sale if you want. You can do that kind of thing. And in some ways it works. Mm-hmm. But the singles also stand completely by themselves too.
There's a certain album from the same period we were talking about that does that very same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have a very special announcement for those of you out there. We have a contest. And this one's not going to, all you have to do is send your name and address to Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com. And we are giving away 2 copies of the Deluxe Blu-ray version of 8 Days a Week, The Touring Years.
Yay!
And we will take the entries up until Christmas Day. So there you have a little bit of time. The show goes up this week, so you'll have until Christmas Day to enter. And we will pick, I'm not sure how we will pick it, but we will pick the winners out of the entries. And it would help, should I say it would help? It would help if you tell us how much you love the show and why you love the show.
Maybe we'll print them all up and put them in a hat and draw 2 out of the hat.
we might do that too. Tell us who's your favorite. Tell us who you're forming a fan club for. I don't know. Anyway, if you would like to win a copy of the Beatles 8 Days a Week, the Blu-ray Deluxe version, this is the 2-disc version. Then send us your entry, and maybe you'll be the lucky one. So, anybody got a comment or two about anything? The Greg Lake thing was just really sad. Oh God, that was terrible. I was sad to hear that. Oh, one news thing we did not mention, and I got an email actually today about this. Ringo went up to Seattle this past week. Mm-hmm. There was a tribute to Joe Walsh at Seattle's Museum of Pop Culture, MoPop, and they presented Joe Walsh with its annual Founders Award, which is given to artists who have made outstanding contributions to pop music, and Ringo was one of the speakers. Ringo spoke. Paul Allen was another one of the speakers. Paul Allen of Microsoft fame, and there were a bunch of performers: Dave Grohl, Taylor Hawkins, Paul Rogers, your friend Todd Rundgren, Ken, and Kenny.
My musical director.
Your musical director, right? And Robert Randolph, and Noah Hunt also were performed, and it was a benefit for MoPop's youth and education initiatives, and they raised $1.2 million.
Wow, great!
Wow. So,
and also while we were off, Ringo and Barbara attended the Kennedy Center honors, at which Joe Walsh was being honored as a member of the Eagles.
That's right too. I saw. Yeah, we saw the pictures. Ringo flashes peace and love peace sign. So anyway,
let's hear it for Joe Walsh getting his
let's
due.
hear it. Congratulations, Joe Walsh, on both counts.
Although seeing Joe Walsh in a tuxedo is a little is a little much.
I don't know. I think. Well, anyway.
Maybe I'm too used to seeing him in a bathrobe. I don't know.
Probably. Anybody want to say anything to close out? Anybody got any plans or anything to talk about?
I've got something to plug.
I was going to say, I'm sure Ken.
Well, of course.
But I can say it real quickly. On my syndicated show, Every Little Thing, the newest one that I just produced, there is a special segment devoted to songs that have Paul McCartney on drums, and it also includes one of the very last side projects that George Harrison was ever involved in that he recorded in 2001. So that's going to be on my syndicated show, Every Little Thing. If you want to know all the stations that carry it, it's on my website. There's one page devoted to just Every Little Thing. And I will have a couple of special contests coming soon, one of which will involve 4 prizes you can win all at once, major releases of 2016, and that's coming soon.
Okay.
So go to kenmichaelsradio.com.
Mr. Cozen, you got anything coming up that you want to talk about?
No, just to say that you can reach me on Facebook at either Alan Cozen or Alan Cozen Remixed.
Okay. Al?
I'm just going to say actually the Twitter contact at ASUSS49 and also www.beatlefan.com for Beatle Fan Magazine, because I'm thinking very seriously of getting out of the cesspool that Facebook has become.
Okay.
Steve,
right.
you I think when you announced the contest, I'm not sure if you gave the email address.
I did. Things we said today, radioshow@gmail.com. I did say that.
Great. So there it is again.
Ken, did you give your email address?
No, I did not. Thank you, Steve. It's everylittlething@att.net.
And you can reach me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I will soon. I am working on a interview I did just before the interview I did with Gary Brooker. I'm working on an interview with Harry Benson, the photographer. I actually have done it already, and I'm in the midst of transcribing that, and that should be up. I don't know, in a few days, I hope.
Have you seen the new documentary?
Yes, I have. It's very good. Okay. Very good.
I've heard it's very interesting.
And you know who gives a an endorsement of Mr. Benson at the beginning of the movie? Donald Trump.
Oh no, really? I thought you were going to say Louise Harrison.
No, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is at the beginning of the video. I know there are probably some Trump supporters listening out there, but that is the case. So that was interesting, and we talked about what it was like to photograph Donald Trump, among other things. Actually, we talked mostly about photographing the Beatles, but we talked about that. We talked about he was also on the scene the night Bobby Kennedy got shot.
Right, but
he was right next to him.
Yes, he was.
That's a great deal of this film is about that, right?
Some of it is, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, he talked about that too. I remember that very, very well because at the time I had actually done some volunteer work for Bobby Kennedy for the campaign, and my dad woke me up in the middle of the night to tell me he'd been killed. It was terrible. That was horrible. But anyway, so that'll be coming soon. And I have a Beatles news group called Beatles News and Commentary on Facebook that you're more than welcome to join. Anyway, I've blabbed on enough. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget the contest. And for Al Sussman, Alan Kozin, and Ken Michaels, this is Steve Marinucci of Things We Said Today saying thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.